Welcome to the Shuttlecock podcast, brought to you by Badminton South Australia, the show that talks about the badminton community and the sports industry. Thanks to our amazing sponsors, Badminton Australia, Bendigo Bank West Beach and O'Neill Sportswear.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of the Shuttlecock podcast. Joining us on the show today is Dr. Nick Takos. Nick, how are you, mate?
I'm very well, and thank you. You've got my name right. Not many people do, so thank you for that.
No, I had a friend who I went to uni with, and he had the exact same last name, so it's pretty easy for me.
There's not many Takoses around. Who is it?
His name's Jackson.
That's my nephew.
Adelaide's small world, unbelievable.
Yeah.
Nick, would you be able to tell us a little bit about your career and some of the different sporting organisations that you've been a part of?
Yeah, sure. How far back do you want me to go? I'm pretty old now.
As far as you feel comfortable.
Well, I started out with an economics degree. Loved sport, but back then you didn't really, you weren't confident that there was an industry that would employ people. You know, it really wasn't anywhere near the scale that it is now. So I started with economics where I really loved economics, didn't really see myself having a future in that area, worked in a bank. But I thought, okay, I want to go in a different direction. So I started studying marketing, and that helped me when a marketing role came up at the Adelaide Football Club, looking for someone with a marketing interest or background. I was fortunate enough to get a job there. So the Adelaide Footy Club back in 96, full-time staff was something like 24. Today would be something probably in AFL club would be probably 120, 130 full-time staff. So different environment back then. You really did get the opportunity to do, as you were talking about earlier with Badminton SA, a smaller organisation, you get to do a lot of different things, and you can sort of determine your own focus a bit as well, because there's so much variety of tasks you can do. So I did that for a while, but it was an expanding industry, the AFL, back then. So when the industry is expanding and you're in an organisation in an expanding industry, there's growth. So the organisation, the AFL club, the Adelaide Crows, was expanding. So that opened other opportunities for me as well. So I was able to go from the level I was at to a management level, zero in on the commercial side, and then end up having my own team of people. I ran the Melbourne office there. I ran the commercial side for Adelaide. And then after 14 years, I was getting a bit itchy and been in the one spot for a while. And I took a liking or an interest in leadership. We were fortunate enough to win 2 premierships back to back, which is really hard to do in an equalised competition. And I was fascinated with why we were so good. Now, we had the players, Darren Jarman and Andrew McLeod and people like that, probably before your time, but the older viewers would know who they are. But there was more than that, because teams have good players, but they don't always win, and particularly don't always win premierships and don't always win them back to back. And I was really fascinated by the leadership side. So the president at the time was a guy called Bob Hammond, the CEO, Bill Sanders, the captain, Mark Bickley, and the coach, Malcolm Blight. And I was really fascinated with the way they worked together so effectively. So it sparked an interest in leadership. I left the Crows to start a PhD in leadership, started teaching at university casually, sort of with wife and kids and that sort of stuff. I thought, but the money was drying up a bit. So I went back into sport, worked in netball for a year, started oversaw the Adelaide Strikers introduction in the Big Bash League. So from football to cricket and netball, and then finished the PhD, and now I've ended up at UniSA in the division of business, but focusing on sport management. So I've still got that sport flavour. I love teaching people, like yourself. You're probably a bit older now, but the 20 to 25 year age group who are really keen. They love their sport. So I'm helping develop those people, hopefully for the industry that I've worked in for quite a number of years. That's a snapshot of my background there.
No, it's quite comprehensive, and as someone who was very much invested in trying to get a job in sport and rec, it's really fascinating to hear about people's pathways, because not every pathway is linear. There's going to be times where you have ups and downs, and it just very much depends on timing sometimes.
Absolutely.
It's just one of those strange things. One thing that we have seen in the last 24 months or so is it's been a really hard time for the sports industry as a whole, particularly for AFL clubs, which you and I have both been a part of. But from a big picture point of view, how much has COVID impacted the sports industry from your opinion?
It probably depends on which industry you're looking at in terms of which sector of sport and which level, elite versus grassroots. But I would say it's been obviously a massive impact. But I strongly believe sport can get back to where it was and and keep expanding. A lot of the fundamentals are still there. We've had a lot of things externally affect the industry, as it affects every company, every industry. There's economics, social change, all these things that have happened through COVID have affected everyone. Some have benefited, some sports have benefited. Golf, for example, has benefited. People working from home, people being able to sort of pick their working week a bit means they can nick off early on a Friday and go have a hit of golf. And so some areas have actually benefited from it. Some AFL football, for example, crowds are down. They had to cut their staff. So that's our number one sport in Australia, and they've been affected quite negatively by COVID. But the fundamentals are there. It's a great sport. It's well run. There's no reason why it can't come back after COVID and then continue to expand. So there's a lot of tangents we can go off there, but there's some winners and losers. Overall, it's been a big impact, and people have had to adjust. Some have done quite well. Some of the grassroots sports have done well because people have had a bit more time. They can manage their week a bit better. But yeah, there's been some apprehension for people to go into games and be in big, the fear factor that's been in COVID has, I think, affected crowds. And then what happens then is people get into different habits. Obviously, we've got inflation, so you've got that economic impact, and people are paying more for petrol and other costs. So what has to go if if someone's lost their job, what are you going to cut back? You're not going to cut back your electricity. You're not going to cut back your food for your family. You're going to cut back on those extra additional things. Your $400 membership for the Adelaide Crows or Port Adelaide's probably going to get cut for a year. And once you've cut something, you move your attention to something else and your habits change. That's the challenge for some of these elite sports, is to get people back. And that's what the marketing, the commercial teams and the people that look after promotion, that's what they'll be trying to do. How do we attract people back to get them back into those habits again? And you can see that. I think I saw the Crows actually drop their prices for some tickets for the remainder of the year, if I remember correctly. So there's some initiatives, and the clubs are very professional. They'll know what the challenges are, and they'll be putting resources to it to get them back to where they're at. Having said that, I think people have weathered this. The industry's weathered the storm quite well, I think.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned was golf picking up during COVID. One of the things that I was talking about with one of our guests on the show previously is how unstructured physical activity has increased due to COVID, because, going for a run around the block or, walking the dog is very unstructured versus, all right, you need to be here at this date, this time, and this place. How do you see something like badminton, which is an indoor sport, being affected probably more so than something like golf?
Well, indoor versus outdoor. If you just put it through the lens of COVID fear, there's probably people who think, well, I'd rather be outdoor than indoors. There's certain rules and regulations when you're indoors. Some people don't like wearing masks and checking QR coding and all those sorts of things. So they'll just stick to the things that have less restriction and less regulation on them, I would say. By the same token, some people like that social aspect. We've all been sent to our homes at times. We've all been separated. There's also that social connection that you get from the indoor sport and team sports and those things that have structure. The good part of that is that when you go on a Tuesday night to football training, or you go to the badminton courts, people are going to be there and you're going to mix with people. And we're social beings. So I think there's all these challenges. And I think our next question, or one of the questions you've got on there, is around, what do we do? So we've all got these external challenges that have been put on us. There's some winners and losers, but you just got to, you would have seen that going from Port to badminton. You just got to focus on what you can control and do that the best you can. So keeping it simple, making sure that you're providing the best experience you can. I know golf has done that really well in the last few years. They've had a governance change. They've realigned the way they're governed and the way they deliver their sport. And are you familiar with not sure if you...
I'm not much of a golfer. just a game of frustration for me. I pretty much just slice every ball that I can.
I do the same, or I hook, or I just miss the ball completely because I get angry. I think it's called one golf from memory. They've just realigned. So basically what they've done is reorganise themselves. Before COVID, they already had started that. So they've got their house in order. So when you get a challenge like you have with COVID, which is one of the biggest challenges you can get and all the things around that, they were as well organised as they could be. So that's all you can do. All you can do is be as well organised as you can be, whether that's a grassroots sport or even an elite sport. Just do those things that you can control the best way possible, and then you're going to maximise what you can get out of the resources you've got. That's all any organisation can do, is just do the best you can and be as organised as you can. And that comes back to having a strategic plan. I've worked in, I'll name the sport. When I went to netball, I was really surprised at the strategic plan. And you'd think a governing body, this was back in 2016, would have a well put together strategic plan, and they didn't. Now that's just fundamental. Just having a good, it could be quite simple, but just having a bit of a roadmap, and then making sure you've got the right people. Just getting those things right can position you well for all the challenges that COVID has brought, and challenges that happened pre and post COVID.
You mentioned the strategic plan. That's something that we've recently touched up at Badminton SA, and I feel like it's going to give us a really good blueprint about what we can expect and what we can achieve over the next couple of years. I had involvement writing about where we're going to be in this year, next year, and the year after in terms of participation. All right, are we going to have an emphasis on visiting Indigenous students this year? Are we going to have a focus on trying to create a more sustainable ID program or have more after school centres? So if you've got those key performance indicators, KPIs, you're going to hold yourself in really good stead going forward. Nick, you've spent a lot of time with Adelaide Crows, as you mentioned previously, spent some time with Netball SA. You saw the introduction of the Adelaide Strikers into the BBL, which are all really strong brands. And those three sports in AFL, netball and cricket are highly commercialised. What's it like working in a highly commercialised sport? Is there a bit more pressure compared to something like badminton, which wouldn't have as much resources compared to one of those larger corporations?
If I start with the AFL, so because I worked in the commercial area for the Adelaide Crows, the numbers are bigger. Pressure, at the end of the day, it's whatever the pressure you put on yourself is the pressure, which sounds like a bit corny, but it's true. What is the pressure? You've got financial targets you have to meet, which you have at the grassroots organisations as well. Yes, the brand, it's easier to get out there and meet with organisations. Like when you mentioned the Adelaide Crows, people want to know more. They want to meet with you. So you can get doors opened a lot more easily. You have a bigger network to tap into. But yeah, it's very competitive. So you've got AFL clubs, Big Bash League, netball. Everyone's knocking on the doors of the same people and the same corporate organisations, the same media outlets. And if you're in an AFL club, you're asking for bigger dollars, so you're asking for a bigger chunk of a company's budget. So you have to be more professional at that level because the numbers are bigger. But I would say it's highly competitive still, similar to what the pressures you get at the smaller organisations,
but on a much larger scale.
Just different numbers, really, but it's still pressure. You still, the passion of sport, of the people involved. So in badminton, your participants, and the parents, and those groups of the people. In elite sport, you've got the athletes, the umpire. People are passionate in sport. That's what separates all of us from other industries. People aren't as passionate about their bank as they are about their sporting team or their sport. So we all have that we have to, that's the thing that we've all got, is that people are going to, they're going to put a lot of attention to what you're doing, whether it's grassroots or elite, because of that passion. The challenge for netball was they're trying to manage an elite team, the Adelaide Thunderbirds, and they're also trying to manage the participation pathway. And when you've got an elite team, you've got to be the best. And that costs money and that costs resources. So if you're going to put resources into that, well, that drags resources away from the participation side. An AFL club pretty much focuses on the team that's trying to win premierships and games.
Purely performance.
So a lot of the resources go into that. They haven't got that tension between grassroots and now if you slip in your resources and attention to your elite team, in netball there's however many other teams, I can't remember how many teams there were, but at that top level, they're all high performance organisations as well. Some of the bigger states have more resources, but you're going to slip and find yourself at the bottom of the ladder pretty quickly. And then you get the pressure mounts when you're not winning. And that then it flows through eventually to your participation rates. When if the Thunderbirds are finishing bottom every year, it doesn't motivate people as much to take up netball. So that's the challenge you had in netball. And the other challenge for netball is the growth of female
AFLW
participation in non-traditional sport. So male sport, traditionally AFL, is now attracting women, and they've gone for the jugular. The AFL, they're not leaving it to chance. They've gone in and gone whack. Here's what we're paying elite athletes in the AFLW now, which is well above what any other sport in Australia is playing. So they're getting the best athletes now to come across. So that doesn't help netball either. So that was the biggest challenge for netball. For cricket, the Big Bash League was sensational. It revamped the T20 competition back then. The very first year we had redbacks who were traditionally red coming out in blue, and our fast bowler, who everyone knew, Sean Tate, was playing for the opposition. So it was a big challenge, but it worked. They revamped the whole game. They knew who their target market was. They were targeting families because Test cricket and Shield cricket didn't attract the ladies as much and the kids as much. So they thought, well, let's design our product for families to grow, and it did. It grew it. The challenge they had was it went well for the first few years, I said this from day one, that getting the Australian players to play and the bigger names to play was something they had to try and that was the challenge, is the calendar, trying to get the bigger names playing in the comp. That was one of the challenges. The other challenge they had, and they overcame it successfully, was getting it from pay TV to free to air. So they end up getting more money from the media rights, which was brilliant. So that puts more money into cricket, which then flows down to the participation level. But by having it on free to air, you've got a bigger audience. So that grows the game because more people can see it more easily. And once you have a bigger reach and audience, that's a bigger audience that the commercial sector can reach as well. So they'll pay more money. And that was tracking beautifully. But I just think it's hit it before COVID. It was starting to drop off because they weren't investing in what made it so successful. The innovation and it got a little bit stale. I think you got to keep. Problem when you've got a product like that people know that you're always creating an improved atmosphere. You got to keep doing it. And that was a challenge. But they also were challenging because they've got cricket's controlled by India. And India will say, well, we want to play here, and the test team goes over and plays over there, and it might clash with the Big Bash leagues. And so they can't get the players playing in the Big Bash league. So there were some unique challenges with all three of those sports.
From your previous experience, what advice would you give to some of the smaller sporting organisations, maybe like a volleyball or a squash or a badminton? What sort of advice would you give them if you're looking to attract more participants, more sponsors, just more everything, really?
My broadest advice would, this is sort of comes down to my personal philosophy, is that people are everything in sport. So having the right people and making sure you look after the people that are in your network. That's not just your staff, that's everybody. So getting the people in your staff that are dealing with all the people in your sport. So they've got to be people, the right people, because that's the base of people that will work the hardest for you in terms of your staff. And if you don't want to be losing participants and losing sponsors and losing parents who pull their kids out. If you just got to understand that it's a people game. So if you can have that philosophy, I think that's number one. And the number two is and we touched on it when we talked about the strategy side of things, is keeping it simple. So the difference between elite and more grassroots sports is you don't have the resources. So don't try and do too much, but really, really focus on the absolute key priorities. So work out what are your absolute key priorities, make them the focus, and achieve them before you try and do everything else. I've worked for, one thing I mentioned, I did work for Recreation SA for just under a year, very small governing body, no resources at all. And we had a board of 8, 9, 10 people. We had 2 full-time staff and two or three casuals. You have a board meeting with 8, 9, 10 people and they come up with all these ideas. And then all those ideas fall down to 3 staff. You just can't do it. You can't do all the things that the board want you to do. So you've got to be realistic and honest with each other and say, well, here's our priorities. Let's get these done first. Let's make sure we can do these. I saw it at netball too. We had all these things we were trying to do and we couldn't do any of them properly. And we just kept chasing our tail. You just have to say no to some things and focus on those things that are the most important and do them really well. And critical to that is the right people.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. We've got a great group of volunteers who are on the board of Badminton South Australia, and I wouldn't be able to do what I've done without their support. And, good people are hard to find.
So you can't afford to lose them. And you will lose some people on the way, but do your best. Everything you can do to keep those good people. Yeah.
Absolutely. Nick, you're currently working at the University of South Australia as a lecturer, and you've also done some work for Torrens University in your time. What's it like teaching people who want to actually get into the sports industry?
Well, it's a passion of mine since I've opened my eyes sport. So I've got the passion, and it's great to teach something that you have a passion for. And then when you see people that have a similar passion, that's you just can't beat it when 2 people come together with the same passion. And I've made every mistake you can make in my career, and that means you're trying things and you're learning. And if I can pass some of that on, then that gives me a lot of satisfaction as well. And the other thing too, as you get a bit older, you don't have the same energy levels. So it's great to have people with that youthful energy, and you can feed off that. So I feed a lot. I've got a young lad who he calls me his mentor. He's about 30. He's just finished his PhD actually. And I say to him all the time, I think you're mentoring me as much as I'm mentoring you. I actually get as much out of it as what he gets out of it. And the other thing I did, I was involved with West Adelaide Football Club. They've had a tough time the last 3 or 4 years. Same thing though. There are a bunch of young, I was involved with the male side of it, and a bunch of young men who just are so keen and passionate. And I fed off that. They were doing things I can't do anymore. I can't get out and play football. Is that actually, I can't remember what the question was now, but I feed off it. I get as much out as they do. And I have the view with young people that anything is possible. You cannot put limits on, because you even touched on it. It's all about timing. You never know you just don't know what you're capable of and what opportunities might come. I've had, we touched on it briefly before we started the interview, an interesting couple of years. I was on the Crows board, which I didn't know I was going to be on the Crows board. It was never really on my radar. And I got on there, and then COVID hit. And lo and behold, that was an issue that was bigger than the club. And all of a sudden I've had to face the position of the club I've loved for 21 years. I've had to resign from the board, something I was loving doing. And I didn't see that coming either. And that got national profile, which I didn't set out to do originally. So you never know what's around the corner. And I have that attitude with everyone I teach. Anything's possible. Don't limit yourself. And that gives me satisfaction knowing that they could end up anywhere. And we talked about it before as well, that I love seeing students that I've taught end up in the industry. It's so satisfying.
Yeah, it's obviously teaching's a very rewarding thing. And I know through my experience that I've had in the classroom so far, once something finally clicks for a student or you see that improvement, that's where you get your buzz and you get your high. Yeah. And it's just such an uplifting feeling. Yeah. Is there any particular research that you're working on at the moment? Yeah.
So I've mentioned about the background to my interest in leadership, and that was where my PhD centred. It was on the AFL. So that my interest in how the Crows had some success in that period, and I thought it was linked to leadership. So I studied the AFL for 10 clubs. So I studied some top clubs like Geelong and Sydney and those sort of clubs, and some clubs that weren't going so well and some in the middle. And I looked at their boards, and I looked at leadership within the board. And I looked at leadership in the clubs that had long-term success versus clubs that had middle success and clubs that were quite often near the bottom of the ladder in terms of win-loss and premierships and those sorts of things. But I really just looked in the board, and it's really hard to get inside boards. There